Welcome to The Witch of Brackenby Lane, a chilling Hercule Poirot mystery where superstition meets murder. The wind howls across the Yorkshire moors, and inside the grand, shadowed halls of Brackenby Manor, a scream pierces the night. A man is found dead, no weapon, no struggle, only terror frozen on his face. The villagers whisper of an old curse, of the Witch of Brackenby Lane, said to haunt those who wronged her bloodline. But when Hercule Poirot arrives, he brings not belief in ghosts, but in human deceit. Every whisper, every glance, every trembling lie will lead him closer to the truth and to a revelation far darker than superstition. So settle in, mon ami. Turn down the lights, listen closely, and tell us, where are you joining from tonight? The mystery begins now. The wind howled down Brackenby Lane that night, bending the hedgerows and scattering dead leaves across the lonely road like whispers of the dead. Halloween in Yorkshire had never been kind, and yet, for the villagers of Brackenby, it was a night of old tales and harmless mischief until the scream came from the manor. Lady Isabel, Marchmont's cry, shattered the tranquil, dark like glass. By the time the servants rushed into the library, the fire had nearly died, and Sir Geoffrey Marchmont sat slumped in his chair, his hand still resting on the poker stand beside him, his face contorted in disbelief. The air smelt faintly of burnt tobacco and something sharper, perhaps fear itself. The doctor was summoned, the police too. But by dawn the rumour had already taken flight across Brackenby. The Witch of Brackenby Lane had claimed her revenge at last. Children spoke of the black cat that had been seen near the manor gates, and of the strange old woman who had once cursed the Marchmont family before disappearing into the moors. Lady Isabel, pale and trembling, told Inspector Halliday that her husband had been quite well an hour before. He was in high spirits, she insisted. He had a letter from someone he refused to name. Then he simply died. The inspector, a practical man with little patience for village folklore, frowned at the poker. No mark of violence, he said curtly. Poison, most likely. But how administered? And who had the chance? There were guests in the house that night, 5 of them. Mr. Colin Amesbury, Sir Geoffrey's nephew, known for his gambling debts and easy charm. Miss Evelyn Moor, Lady Isabel's companion, quiet, devout, yet with eyes that missed nothing. Dr. Leonard Voss, the family physician, who had been attending to Sir Geoffrey's insomnia. Mrs. Edith Penrose, an old family friend, whose affection for the late Sir Geoffrey bordered on devotion. And finally, Mr. Hugo Blake, a writer of occult novels, who claimed to be researching the psychological roots of superstition. He had come to Brackenby to study the legend of the witch. Each swore innocence, each had reason to lie. By the time the autumn sun rose weakly over the moors, the inspector had sent a telegram to London. The message was brief. Mysterious death at Brackenby Manor. Closed circle of suspects. Request assistance of Hercule Poirot. Urgent. And so, somewhere in a quiet corner of London, the great Belgian detective laid down his silver-topped cane, straightened the crease of his trousers, and smiled faintly at the wire. A witch, you say? Ah, mon ami. Already I am intrigued. By the following evening, a fine mist clung to the hedgerows as a black motor car rolled steadily down Brackenby Lane. Within sat a small, fastidious man with a neatly waxed moustache and eyes that glittered like sharp steel beneath the brim of his bowler hat. Hercule Poirot surveyed the gloomy countryside with evident distaste. The moors stretched endlessly on either side, grey and sodden, and the wind carried a mournful hum that seemed to whisper secrets from the earth itself. Mon Dieu, he murmured, drawing his coat closer. Such melancholy. Even the land mourns, perhaps, for the sins committed upon it. As the car turned through the wrought-iron gates of Brackenby Manor, the house loomed ahead, vast, square, and sullen beneath the overcast sky. Its stone walls were darkened by rain, and the ivy that climbed its sides seemed to claw rather than embrace. A butler awaited at the entrance, his face grave and voice subdued. Monsieur Poirot, Lady Marchmont is expecting you." Poirot inclined his head, stepping into the dimly lit hall where the air felt thick with perfume and secrets. Lady Isabel descended the staircase, her pale silk gown whispering softly against the banister. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry, as though she had shed her tears too quickly and now clung only to composure. "Monsieur Poirot," she said with a tremor in her voice, "thank you for coming. My husband's death, it was sudden, and yet there was something in the air that night, something dreadful." Poirot gave a gentle bow. "It is always my pleasure to serve the truth, madame, and perhaps," he added softly, "to bring peace to a soul unjustly disturbed." His gaze drifted past her to a portrait hanging above the staircase, a stern-faced woman in dark robes, her expression both proud and sorrowful. Lady Isabel followed his glance. That was Rowena Marchmont, the one they call the Witch of Brackenby Lane, an ancestor from centuries past. Some say her curse still lingers. Poirot's brows lifted slightly. "Ah, a curse. I see we begin already with the superstitions." They moved into the library where the fire crackled low. Poirot surveyed the room with precise attention. The half-empty brandy decanter, the overturned book on the side table, the faint mark where a glass had rested too long. His eyes flickered to the poker stand beside the hearth. "You see, madame," he said quietly, "in a room such as this, nothing is truly ordinary. Even the smallest thing it speaks." He crouched, examining a small scattering of ash near the grate, "and some things whisper." Inspector Halliday entered with brisk steps, his coat collar turned up against the chill. "Evening, Poirot. Glad you could come. Straightforward case, I'd say. Poison. Probably slipped into his drink. Motive. Money, of course. It always is." Poirot gave a faint smile. "Ah, the English logic so practical, so reliable, and yet so very blind to the subtleties of the heart." Halliday frowned, but said nothing. Poirot turned toward the circle of chairs, arranged near the hearth. "You will have the kindness to assemble the guests here, mon ami. I should like to meet them at once." One by one, they entered the suspects, the players in this shadowed drama. Colin Amesbury was the first, his expression too casual, his smile too bright. "Terrible business, this," he said, though his eyes never met Poirot's for long. Evelyn Moor followed, her quiet, composure unsettlingly still. She seemed to watch everything, even herself, from a distance. Dr. Voss arrived next, tall, severe, his fingers stained faintly with nicotine. He nodded curtly, as though the death of his patient were merely another unfortunate case. Mrs. Penrose came last, clutching a handkerchief embroidered with the initials G.M. She dabbed at her eyes, though no tears fell. And then Mr. Hugo Blake, a man with ink-stained fingers and a gaze that gleamed with amused curiosity. "I've read about you, Monsieur Poirot," he said. "A pleasure to meet a mind that rivals fiction." Poirot smiled politely. "Let us hope, monsieur, that reality does not attempt to compete." As they took their seats, the rain began again, drumming softly against the windows. Poirot stood before them, his small frame poised with quiet authority. "I thank you for your cooperation, mesdames et messieurs. You are all gathered here by circumstance, a circumstance most tragic. But rest assured, Hercule Poirot seeks not accusation, only truth. And truth, you see, is like the moon hidden by clouds, but always present." A silence followed, heavy and taut. Poirot's eyes moved slowly from face to face, reading the flickers of unease that passed like ripples in still water. "Each of you," he continued, "was close to Sir Geoffrey. Each of you knew him as a man of wealth, of pride, perhaps of cruelty. But tell me who among you knew his fear?" The question hung in the air, sharp and sudden. Colin stirred, glancing uneasily toward the fire. Evelyn lowered her gaze. Dr. Voss cleared his throat. Mrs. Penrose's hand trembled slightly. Only Hugo Blake smiled faintly, as though savouring the drama. Poirot watched him a moment longer, then turned to Lady Isabel. "Madame, if you please, I should like to see the letter your husband received on the night of his death." Her hand froze on the arm of her chair. The letter? But it was not found. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah," he said softly. "Then already we begin with a mystery within a mystery." Lady Isabel's voice faltered as she tried to explain. "The letter was upon his desk when I last saw him. Geoffrey said it was of no importance. After his death, it was gone." Her words trailed into the silence, each syllable trembling like a candle flame in a draught. Poirot's gaze lingered upon her pale hands. They were clasped tightly, the knuckles bloodless, as though she were holding something within not an object, but a truth too fragile to release. He stepped closer to the writing table near the window, where papers lay neatly arranged. Only one corner bore an irregular space, the faint mark of where an envelope might once have rested. Poirot bent slightly, his eyes narrowing. "You are a woman of order, madame. Your husband, too, I think, was precise. One does not misplace correspondence in such a household." He looked up suddenly. "This missing letter, it is not a trifle. It is the heart of this affair." Inspector Halliday muttered from behind. "Could have been burned. Maybe he threw it in the fire himself." Poirot's eyes flicked to the grate, still faintly dusted with ash. "Non, mon ami? You see the ashes? The fragments are large, grey, the remains of coal and paper for kindling. But there—" He crouched and pointed to a single dark fleck, half hidden beneath the poker stand. "That, Inspector, is the corner of a burnt envelope. The ink, see how it blotted before burning. Someone was in haste." Lady Isabel gave a small gasp. Evelyn Moor, standing by the bookshelf, murmured, "It could have been an accident." Poirot turned his head slowly, regarding her with quiet curiosity. "Accidents, mademoiselle, rarely occur in rooms where every object has been chosen with care. No, this was deliberate." A sudden clap of thunder rolled through the air, the windows rattling in their frames. In that instant, a soft sound escaped Mrs. Penrose's throat, a stifled sob, quickly masked by her handkerchief. Poirot's sharp gaze caught it. "You are troubled, madame?" he asked gently. "Forgive me," she said, her voice quivering. "It's all so dreadful. Geoffrey was good to me, to all of us." She hesitated, eyes glancing toward Lady Isabel with a flicker of guilt. Poirot noted the glance, delicate and fleeting, yet full of weight. "And yet," he said softly, "grief often reveals what politeness conceals." Dr. Voss stepped forward abruptly, his tone edged with irritation. "This is morbid. I can confirm that Sir Geoffrey's death was from poison, most likely digitalis, a heart stimulant, but deadly if misused. It could have been accidental." Poirot turned, his expression unreadable. "You speak with confidence, doctor. Yet you were his physician, were you not? Did you prescribe such a drug?" Voss stiffened. "I did. For his heart palpitations. He had been anxious of late." Poirot tilted his head. "Anxious? Yes. And this anxiety, did it begin after the arrival of Monsieur Blake, perhaps?" The room grew still. Hugo Blake, lounging near the mantel, looked up with faint amusement. "I flatter myself if I caused such disturbance. I came to write, to study the legend of the witch. Sir Geoffrey was fascinated, perhaps too much so. He even claimed to have seen her one night on the moor." A slow smile touched his lips. "He said she warned him his death would come by fire and by words." Poirot's brows drew together. "By fire and by words," he repeated. "An odd prophecy, yet the fire did not kill him, and the only words that remain are those of a missing letter. Curious." He began to pace, his fingertips pressed together in that delicate gesture of concentration. "Tell me, Monsieur Blake, where were you at the time of Sir Geoffrey's death?" "In my room, writing," Blake replied lightly. "I heard nothing, until Lady Isabel screamed. Poirot looked to Evelyn. "And you, mademoiselle?" "I was in the conservatory," she answered, her voice soft, almost detached. The storm had just begun. I heard the clock strike 9, then silence. I did not come up until after. Colin Amesbury, seated with one leg crossed carelessly, smirked faintly. I was playing cards with Dr. Voss in the smoking room. If you must know, the servants can vouch for that. Poirot turned toward the inspector. So many alibis, all so neat, and yet I find neatness to be suspicious when death is so untidy. He stopped, his eyes sweeping the faces before him. One of you lies, and you lie well. But remember this, the truth is patient. It waits. He moved back toward the hearth, plucking the tiny burnt fragment from the ashes with his handkerchief and slipping it into an envelope. "There is still a scent here," he murmured. "A faint trace of something bitter, perhaps ink, perhaps something else. Halliday, I shall need your cooperation. Have the servants remain within the house. No one is to leave until I have finished." The inspector grumbled assent, while Poirot turned once more to Lady Isabel. "Madame, you spoke of your husband's fears. Did he name the person he dreaded?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Only her eyes moved to Evelyn, to Blake, to the portrait of the witch that seemed to brood over them all. Poirot followed her gaze. "Ah," he whispered, "she watches still. Perhaps she knows who carries her curse." A gust of wind rushed down the chimney, scattering ash across the rug. The flames flickered wildly, and for one instant, Poirot thought he saw the faint outline of a woman's face within them, stern, proud, and weeping. He smiled faintly to himself. "Superstition, yes," he murmured. "But behind superstition always, there is reason." And somewhere within Brackenby Manor, reason had already begun to whisper its terrible truth. The storm had not relented through the night. Rain lashed against the windows like desperate fingers, and the great chiming clock in the hall marked each passing hour with an echo that felt heavy and accusing. Poirot, sleepless as ever, sat in the small drawing-room adjoining the library. A single lamp illuminated his face, casting long, sharp shadows that flickered with the restless firelight. Before him lay the rescued fragment of the letter, charred, fragile, yet still carrying the faint scent of smoke and something else, a perfume perhaps, sweet and incongruous. He turned it delicately in his gloved hands, his expression thoughtful. "A woman's perfume," he murmured to himself, "or perhaps one that a man would never think to use." He rose and crossed to the window, gazing out at the drenched gardens. The manor's lights were dim now, most of its inhabitants having retreated to their rooms. Only the faint glimmer from a lantern moved along the path, leading to the stables. Poirot's sharp eyes narrowed. Someone was awake when they ought not to be. He watched for a moment longer, then turned to the door. "It is always at night," he whispered, "that guilt grows restless." Minutes later, he stepped quietly into the corridor, his polished shoes soundless upon the carpet. The walls seemed to breathe with the house's age creaking timbers, distant whispers of wind through keyholes. As he descended the staircase, a faint sound reached him, the soft click of a door closing near the servants' passage. Poirot paused, listening. Then, as silent as a cat, he followed. At the end of the passage, a narrow door opened into the conservatory, where rain pattered faintly upon the glass roof. Within stood Evelyn Moor, her back turned, her slender form motionless as she stared at the storm outside. Poirot cleared his throat gently, and she started, spinning around. "Monsieur Poirot, you startled me." "Could I, mademoiselle? The mind, when troubled, refuses to rest. May I inquire what draws you here at this hour?" Her hands twisted together nervously. "It is peaceful. The others seem haunted tonight. Lady Isabel has locked herself in her room, and poor Mrs. Penrose, she weeps in silence. I thought a walk might clear my thoughts." Poirot stepped closer, his gaze resting briefly on the small table near the wall. A delicate scent lingered there, faint but unmistakable, the same he had detected upon the burnt fragment. He said nothing of it, merely smiled. "You are fond of flowers?" "Yes, they are the only things in this house that do not pretend." Evelyn gave a faint, sad smile. "I suppose they can't lie." "None," Poirot said softly. "But humans, alas, they lie even when they believe they tell the truth." Her eyes flickered uneasily, and he saw the faint tremor that betrayed her calm. "You believe someone in this house killed him," she said, suddenly. Poirot inclined his head. "I believe, mademoiselle, that the hand which wrote that letter also destroyed it. And that letter, it frightened Sir Geoffrey more than any witch upon the moor." She turned pale. "Then you think it was a threat?" "I think," said Poirot, "it was a confession disguised as a curse." Before she could reply, a sharp sound echoed from the corridor, a crash, followed by a muffled cry. Evelyn gasped. Poirot's expression hardened, and together they hurried toward the noise. The door to the library stood ajar, the fire still glowing faintly within. On the floor lay Mrs. Penrose, her hand clutching her chest, a small glass bottle rolling beside her. Poirot knelt instantly. "Quickly! Fetch the doctor!" Evelyn darted away, her footsteps fading down the hall. Poirot lifted the woman's hand. Her pulse fluttered weakly. Her lips moved, forming a word he could scarcely hear. "Letter," she breathed, and then her eyes rolled back, her body going still. Poirot stood, eyes darting to the bottle. Its label had been scratched away, but the scent that rose from it was unmistakable digitalis. Moments later, Dr. Voss arrived, disheveled, his dressing gown hastily tied. "She's fainted?" he asked sharply, kneeling beside her. Poirot said nothing, merely watched as the doctor examined her, his brow furrowing. "She's alive," he muttered. "Poison again, but not fatal. Someone meant to frighten her, not kill her." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Or perhaps she meant to frighten herself, Doctor. Guilt, you see, plays strange tricks upon the heart." Voss looked up sharply. "You think she knew something?" "I think," said Poirot quietly, "that she knew too much, and someone feared she would speak." Evelyn returned then, pale and shaken. The others heard the noise their coming. Poirot's gaze swept the room swiftly. The book upon the desk had been opened, its pages torn, as though someone had searched it in haste. He moved closer and saw, pressed between the pages, a single petal of lavender, brittle and faintly scented, the same fragrance that clung to the burnt scrap of letter. He closed the book gently, his mind alive with silent calculation. "So," he murmured, "we have poison, fear, and a flower, a trifecta most delicate. Madame Penrose may yet live to tell us the truth, but until then, we must listen not to her words, but to her actions. Halliday, I suggest you place a constable outside her door. She must not be left alone." The inspector nodded, bewildered. "You think she's the target?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps. Or perhaps she is the bait." As he spoke, the wind howled once more through the chimney, and the flames leapt high, illuminating the portrait above the hearth. The painted witch seemed almost alive now, her eyes glinting through the dance of shadow and light. Poirot looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Madame Rowena," he whispered softly, "you warned Sir Geoffrey of fire and words. It seems your prophecy burns still." The rain eased by morning, though the house remained cloaked in an uneasy silence. A fog drifted over the lawns like pale breath, curling around the statues that lined the garden path. Within, Brackenby Manor seemed to have aged overnight, the air thick with dread, the servants whispering as though the walls themselves might overhear. Poirot stood in the breakfast room, immaculate as ever, his cup of coffee untouched, his gaze distant and watchful. He had slept little, yet his mind had worked tirelessly through the night, assembling and rearranging the puzzle pieces that had begun to take their peculiar shape. Inspector Halliday entered, looking weary. "Mrs. Penrose is still unconscious," he said. "The doctor says she'll recover. She's under guard, as you instructed." Poirot nodded, slightly, not taking his eyes off the mist outside. "Bon, she lives, and so the truth still breathes. It would be most inconvenient for me if she were to die before speaking." The inspector frowned. "You still think she poisoned herself?" Poirot turned to him then, his expression one of mild amusement. "I think, my friend, that guilt takes many forms. Some wish to hide it, others to wash it away. Madame Penrose, she chose perhaps the second." Before Halliday could reply, the door opened and Colin Amesbury strode in, his air of arrogance only slightly diminished by the dark circles beneath his eyes. "Are we to remain prisoners here, Inspector?" he demanded. "The servants are hysterical, my aunt's in pieces, and that fellow Blake keeps prowling about like a cat with something to hide. This farce can't go on forever." Poirot turned his head, his gaze calm but penetrating. "Monsieur Amesbury, a man who complains of confinement usually fears what may be discovered within its walls." Colin flushed angrily. "I've nothing to fear. My uncle and I had our differences, yes, but I'd hardly kill him for them." Poirot's voice was soft, but it silenced the room. "Perhaps not for differences. No, but for money, for freedom, for love. These are motives that visit even the most respectable minds." Colin's jaw tightened. "You're accusing me of nothing less than murder." Poirot smiled faintly. "Non, monsieur. I accuse no one. I only listen. But tell me, when you last saw Sir Geoffrey alive, what did he say to you?" The young man hesitated, his confidence faltering. He said he'd settled my allowance, that he meant to make changes to his will." "Changes?" Poirot's brow arched. "How interesting. And were those changes in your favor?" Colin's lips curved into a bitter smile. "Hardly. He meant to cut me off entirely. Said I'd shamed the family." Poirot nodded slowly. "And yet you did not argue? You did not plead?" Colin looked away. "I was angry, yes, but I left the room. Ask Voss, he saw me in the smoking room after that." Poirot regarded him for a long moment, then said simply, "Yes, you left the room, but did you leave the thought behind?" The words hung in the air, cold and precise. Colin turned sharply and left without another word. The inspector sighed. "You push them too hard, Poirot. He'll bolt if you keep cornering him." Poirot smiled gently. "If a man bolts, my friend, it is only because he has somewhere to run. It is most revealing. N'est pas?" Just then, a soft voice came from the doorway. Lady Isabel stood there, wan and trembling, her eyes haunted. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, "may I speak with you alone?" He gestured courteously, and Halliday left the room. When the door closed, she came closer, her composure breaking. "I cannot bear this," she said. "This suspicion, these dreadful whispers. Geoffrey was a difficult man, yes, but he did not deserve this end. And She stopped, pressing a trembling hand to her lips. Poirot's tone was gentle but firm. "And you, madame, feel there is something you must tell me?" Tears welled in her eyes. "That night, he told me he'd received a letter warning him that his past would destroy him. He wouldn't say from whom, but he was frightened, more than I'd ever seen him. When I found him later, he'd locked himself in the library. I thought it was one of his moods. Oh God, if only I'd stayed." Poirot's eyes glimmered with keen interest. "His past, you say? Tell me, Lady Isabel, what in Sir Geoffrey's past might someone use to frighten him?" She hesitated, her gaze flickering toward the window where the fog thickened. "There was a girl," she whispered, "years ago, before we married. A maid in his father's household. There were rumors. She disappeared suddenly. Some said she ran away. Others said Geoffrey sent her away. He never spoke of it again. Poirot folded his hands, his expression grave. "And her name?" "Rowena," she said softly. "Rowena Marsh." Poirot's head lifted sharply. "Rowena Marsh?" And the portrait above the library hearth, Rowena Marchmont. A name changed by marriage, perhaps, or by deceit. He stepped closer. "Madame, I think your husband's ghost was not of legend, but of memory." A sudden knock at the door startled them both. It was Evelyn, her face pale as parchment. "Monsieur Poirot, Mrs. Penrose, she's awake. She wishes to speak with you." Poirot's gaze met Lady Isabel's for a heartbeat, filled with quiet intensity. "Ah, then at last," he said softly. "The words of the living may tell what the dead cannot." He straightened his tie, his eyes alight with that precise and terrible calm that came before revelation. "Come, madame. It is time we listen to the truth before someone silences it again." The corridor to Mrs. Penrose's room was dim, the air heavy with the scent of antiseptic and damp linen. The storm outside had quieted, but within Brackenby Manor, the tension had grown thick and alive, as though the house itself was holding its breath. Poirot walked beside Evelyn and Lady Isabel, his steps measured, his expression unreadable. A constable stood guard at the door and stepped aside at his approach. "She woke just before dawn, sir," he whispered. "Weak, but conscious. The doctor said she might manage a few words." Poirot nodded and entered. The room was lit by a single lamp beside the bed. Mrs. Penrose lay propped against the pillows, her face pale, her eyes fluttering open as he approached. Her breathing was shallow, but when she saw him, something like relief crossed her features. "Monsieur Poirot," she murmured, her voice hoarse. "You must forgive me. I was foolish." "Non, madame," he said softly, taking a chair beside her. "You were afraid. That is not foolishness, it is merely human. Now, you will tell me what frightened you so greatly." Her gaze drifted toward the window, where the fog pressed against the glass like a living thing. "It was the letter," she whispered. "I saw it that night. He had left it on his desk when he went to fetch a drink. I should not have read it, but curiosity. Oh, curiosity is a sin, isn't it?" Poirot leaned forward slightly, his eyes gleaming. "Only a few lines. The past will return for its due. The fire you lit will find you again. The witch remembers." It was unsigned. She closed her eyes, shivering. He turned white when he found me holding it. He said it was nothing, only nonsense. But I knew it was from someone who had cause to hate him. Poirot spoke gently, but every word carried weight. "And you burned it, did you not?" Her eyes opened wide with shock. How could you know?" He smiled faintly. "Because, madame, you burned it too hastily. You destroyed what frightened you most, but fear leaves traces. The ashes spoke to me, and they said your name. I thought it would end with that, but then I saw the portrait in the library. The witch and I remembered the stories. He told me once, years ago, that he had wronged a girl named Rowena. He said she was gone, but I wondered if perhaps she was not." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And you told this to someone?" Her breathing hitched. "To Evelyn. I confided in her that night. She promised to keep it to herself." Lady Isabel's hand flew to her mouth. "Evelyn? My companion?" Mrs. Penrose nodded faintly. She said the legend fascinated her, that she wanted to write about it. But after that, things began to change. Geoffrey grew nervous, secretive. He said someone was watching the house. Poirot rose, pacing slowly toward the window. "And you, madame, why take poison?" She hesitated, shame flickering across her features. Because someone slipped a note beneath my door after his death. It said, 'You know the truth. Be silent, or you will join him.' I couldn't bear it, I thought. If I ended it myself, the fear would stop. Poirot's expression softened, but his mind was racing. "May I see this note?" "I burned it," she whispered. "I thought it cursed." Poirot sighed softly. Ah, the English and their fire, always burning what they should read twice. He turned to Lady Isabel. "Madame, you will see that Mrs. Penrose is well attended. She must not be left alone again." When they stepped into the corridor, Evelyn was waiting, her face composed but pale. "Is she? She will recover," Poirot said smoothly. "But she has spoken enough to confirm that this affair is not one of superstition, but of conscience." His eyes fixed on her with quiet precision. "Mademoiselle, you were close to Mrs. Penrose, were you not?" Yes," she said quickly. "She was kind to me. I pitied her." "Pity, mademoiselle, is a dangerous sentiment. It can lead us to comfort the guilty or to destroy them." Evelyn's eyes flickered. "I don't understand you." "None?" Poirot's voice was mild. "Then allow me to clarify. You were the last to see Sir Geoffrey alive before Lady Isabel found him, were you not? You brought him tea." She froze. "How do you?" "The servant's log," Poirot said softly. "You took the tray yourself, though that was not your duty." "Why?" Her composure faltered for the first time. "He asked me to. He said he wanted to apologize for his temper earlier that day." Poirot's gaze lingered upon her trembling hands. "And did he?" She swallowed. "He tried. But he was nervous, so strange, pacing the room, muttering about the past. I left as soon as I could." Poirot stepped closer. "And you saw the letter?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment she could not speak. "No," she whispered at last. "Ah," Poirot murmured, "but you hesitate before the lie. That, mademoiselle, is what betrays the truth." She turned abruptly and fled down the corridor, her footsteps echoing against the stone floor. Lady Isabel gasped. "Monsieur Poirot, shouldn't you stop her?" Poirot shook his head slowly. "Non, madame. Let her run. A frightened bird always flies back to its nest, and I wish to see where this one hides her secrets." He watched the hallway where Evelyn's shadow had vanished, the faint sound of her retreat still echoing. Then, softly, almost to himself, he said, "The witch remembers. Indeed, but it is not Rowena who haunts this house. It is the living who wear her face." Poirot watched Evelyn vanish around the corner, his expression calm, but his eyes glinting with the sharp gleam of pursuit. The silence of the corridor pressed in after her footsteps faded, and for a long moment he stood motionless, listening not merely with his ears, but with that inner faculty that felt deceit as keenly as others might feel a draught. At last, he turned to Lady Isabel, whose face was drawn with confusion and fear. "Madame," he said softly, "you will do well to remain near Mrs. Penrose. Whatever storm brews within this house, it is not yet finished." She nodded weakly, clutching her shawl as though for warmth, and slipped away toward the stairs. Poirot began to walk, slowly, each step deliberate, his mind turning over every fragment of evidence like a jeweler examining stones for hidden flaws. The burned letter, the lavender perfume, the missing maid of long ago. And now, Evelyn Moor, whose quiet composure had begun to crack under the weight of lies. He reached the end of the passage, where a small gallery overlooked the gardens. The morning fog was lifting now, revealing the twisted oaks and, in black, glistening soil beyond the terrace. There, moving swiftly through the mist, was Evelyn herself, her cloak pulled tight, her figure a shadow against the grey. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "She flees not from guilt, but towards something or someone." Without haste, he turned back toward the stairs, meeting Inspector Halliday at the landing. "Ah, my dear friend," Poirot said cheerfully. "I believe our mademoiselle has gone for her morning walk at a most unusual hour." Halliday frowned. "You think she's running?" "I think," said Poirot, "that she is about to lead us where truth hides. Come, let us follow, but with discretion. The guilty, they do not confess, they reveal." They slipped outside into the damp air, their shoes crunching softly on the gravel. The path wound down toward the edge of the property, where the remains of an old chapel stood half consumed by ivy. Evelyn was there, standing before its crumbling doorway, her hands pressed against the stone. She seemed to be speaking softly, desperately, to someone unseen. Poirot motioned Halliday to remain back and stepped forward alone. "Mademoiselle," he called quietly, "it is a poor confessor you seek among the dead." She spun around, startled, her eyes wide with fear. "Monsieur Poirot the First. You came here for a reason. To meet someone, perhaps." "No," she said quickly, but her voice wavered. "I came to think. I can't breathe in that house. Every wall seems to whisper his name." Poirot stepped closer, his tone soft, coaxing. "It is not the house that whispers, mademoiselle. It is your conscience. You knew Sir Geoffrey feared this place, did you not?" Her face blanched. "He said it was cursed, that the witch would return." "Ah, but tell me who told him that." Poirot's voice dropped to a near whisper. "You, perhaps." For a heartbeat, she said nothing. Then, quietly, "He deserved to be afraid." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "Ah, now we begin to see. You spoke to him of Rowena the maid. You discovered her story, yes?" Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "She was my mother." The wind carried the words like a sigh through the ruined chapel. Poirot's face softened, but his voice remained precise. "Your mother, Rowena Marsh. You came to this house to find the man who ruined her. You came not as companion, but as judge." Her composure broke. "He destroyed her life," she whispered fiercely. "Cast her out when she was with child. She died in poverty while he married his lady and played the gentleman. I only wanted him to know what it was to fear. I never meant to kill him." Poirot watched her closely. "Then you did send the letter?" She nodded, trembling. "I wanted him to see the witch's curse return, to think his sins had found him. I thought he would confess, not die." Poirot sighed softly. "Ah, but guilt. It is a poison more deadly than any drug. You frightened him, mademoiselle, and perhaps another took advantage of your vengeance." Her head snapped up. "Another?" "Yes, someone who saw your game and turned it to their profit." The letter vanished, the ashes burned by another hand. "The digitalis, perhaps not yours, eh?" Evelyn's lips parted in shock. "Then who?" "Shh." Poirot's voice was calm, but his eyes gleamed with sudden insight. "That, mademoiselle, is what I mean to discover. But you will do as I say. You will return to the house. Say nothing. Act as though we have not spoken. For if my suspicions are correct, the true witch still walks these halls, and she does not yet know that I have seen her shadow." Evelyn looked at him, her fear warring with relief, then nodded slowly. As she turned back toward the manor, the grey light caught her tear-streaked face, and Poirot watched her go, his mind a flurry of silent calculation. Halliday approached cautiously. "So she did it?" Poirot shook his head. "Non, mon ami." She struck the match, but another fed the fire. "And before this day ends, I shall know whose hands are truly blackened with the smoke of guilt." He looked once more toward the distant manor, its dark windows glinting like watchful eyes. "Brackenby hides many ghosts," he murmured, "but only one still breathes." By the time Poirot and Halliday returned to Brackenby Manor, the fog had thickened once more, coiling through the hedges and creeping around the eaves like a living shroud. The manor seemed to sink into it, a great grey beast half buried in mist. The gravel crunched beneath their feet as they crossed the courtyard, neither man speaking. Poirot's mind was elsewhere, swift, quiet, dissecting every word Evelyn had spoken. She had sent the letter, yes, but she had not killed. Her vengeance had been meant to frighten, not to end a life, which meant someone had seized that fear and sharpened it into murder. Inside, the air felt stifling. The hall lamps burned low, and somewhere in the depths of the house, a grandfather clock told 10. Poirot paused beneath the portrait of the witch, Rowena Marchmont. Her painted eyes, dark and knowing, followed him down the corridor as he made his way toward the library. "It is curious," he murmured, half to himself, "how often the sins of one generation return wearing the faces of the next." The library door stood slightly ajar. Poirot pushed it open and stepped inside. Lady Isabel was seated near the fire, her face pale and drawn, her hands clasped around a handkerchief. The flames painted her features in restless light. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, rising at once, "is it true what Mrs. Penrose said, that Evelyn was behind the letter?" Poirot inclined his head. "It is true, but she did not mean for your husband to die." Lady Isabel's expression twisted. "And yet he did. You cannot imagine what these whispers have done to me. The servants look at me as if I were next." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "Monsieur Poirot, I must confess something. I, too, received a letter. The day after Geoffrey's death." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "A letter? You have it still?" She nodded, trembling slightly, and drew it from her sleeve. Poirot took it delicately, unfolding the heavy paper. The message was short, written in neat, almost elegant script. "The fire has taken one. The truth will claim another." There was no signature, only a faint scent lavender. Poirot breathed. Again the perfume. "So, our murderer writes not only with poison, but with fragrance. And you did not show this to the inspector." "But now, madame," Poirot said quietly, "you see it is a warning." The door opened suddenly. Dr. Voss entered, his face shadowed with irritation. "There you are, Poirot," Halliday said. "But you wanted to see me." "Indeed," said Poirot, folding the letter neatly and slipping it into his pocket. "You were very attentive to Sir Geoffrey's health, were you not, Doctor? His prescription for digitalis, you kept it here." "In the house." Voss's expression flickered. "Naturally, I always keep a supply for emergencies." Poirot stepped closer. "Then perhaps you will explain how some of it found its way into Sir Geoffrey's glass." The doctor's jaw tightened. "You think I poisoned him? Absurd. He was my patient, my friend." "Your friend who insulted your skill before his guests? I heard he refused your medical advice on more than one occasion." Poirot's tone was light, but his gaze was piercing. Voss's composure cracked. He was a stubborn old man. He thought himself invincible. "I did my best for him." "Ah," murmured Poirot. "And yet when he died, you were curiously quick to name the cause. Digitalis, you said, within moments. How did you know, mon cher docteur, unless you already suspected the method?" The doctor opened his mouth, then shut it again. "Professional instinct," he said at last, his voice low. Poirot smiled gently. "Ah, professional instinct. It is a dangerous thing. That, one begins to rely too much on it and not enough on truth." Voss glared. "If you're implying—" "I imply nothing," said Poirot softly. "I only observe. You see, the poisoner in this case is clever. They use fear as their first weapon, science as their second. The letter frightens, the poison finishes. The lavender scent, that is the final signature, a flourish of vanity. And vanity, Inspector Halliday will tell you, is often the undoing of the intelligent criminal." Lady Isabel looked from one man to the other, confusion in her eyes. "But who could it be?" Poirot turned to the fire, watching the flames curl around the logs. "That, madame, I shall soon reveal. But before I do, I must ask who had the key to your husband's study." "The butler," she said softly. "And Dr. Voss. Geoffrey trusted only him." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Indeed." He turned back to Voss. "Then perhaps you will be so kind, doctor, as to accompany me. I should like to examine your medical case." Voss hesitated. There's nothing to see. Poirot's voice was very quiet now. Au contraire, there is everything to see. Come. The silence that followed was broken only by the slow hiss of the fire. As they left the library, Lady Isabel sank back into her chair, her heart pounding with dread. Down the corridor, Poirot walked beside the doctor, his stride calm, measured, inevitable. You see, mon ami, he said softly, you have mixed two poisons in this house, one chemical, one emotional, and it is the latter that betrays you. The guilty always reveal themselves when confronted by order. Voss said nothing, but his hands trembled as he reached for the latch to his study. Poirot's eyes, sharp as blades, never left him. Somewhere beyond the walls, the wind rose again, and the witch of Brackenby seemed to laugh through the moors. The study smelled faintly of varnish and old leather, the air heavy with the scent of dust, and something metallic beneath it, an odor Poirot recognized at once as medicine and deceit. Doctor, Voss fumbled with the lamp, his movements too quick, too deliberate. The faint tremor in his hands betrayed more than fatigue. Poirot, immaculate even in tension, stepped closer to the desk where a small black case lay open. Within it gleamed vials and bottles, their labels neat, precise, almost obsessively arranged. Voila, Poirot murmured. Such perfect order. It pleases me. But tell me, doctor, why does one bottle stand empty while its neighbors are full? Voss stiffened. That was used earlier this week, an old prescription. I intended to refill it. Poirot's gaze swept to the small drawer, half open beneath the desk. Within, a folded scrap of paper rested like a guilty secret. He plucked it delicately between gloved fingers and unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, the words unmistakably the same as the letter shown by Lady Isabel. The fire has taken one. The truth will claim another. Another, Poirot said softly. So you wrote them both? Voss's composure shattered. No, you're mistaken. I never. Poirot's voice cut cleanly through the denial. Doctor, the hand that writes is as individual as the mind that thinks. Your script betrays you, the same flourish in the T, the same descending loop of the H. Ah, yes, you tried to disguise it, but one cannot so easily disguise the soul. The doctor's breath came fast. You don't understand. Geoffrey ruined me long ago. He mocked my research, destroyed my reputation. I was to inherit nothing while he played the benefactor, laughing at my failures. Poirot's tone was almost sympathetic. And so you decided to take what was owed. You saw the girl's letter, Evelyn's letter, and you saw opportunity. A frightened man, a perfect stage, a convenient poison. You replaced fear with death. Voss's hands clenched. He was already dying. His heart couldn't stand another year. I gave him peace, better than he deserved. Poirot's voice turned cold. Ah, doctor, you speak like so many who kill and call it mercy. But it was not peace you sought, it was power. You wanted the satisfaction of control. Even your letters, your little threats. They were not warnings, they were indulgences. You wished to watch them tremble. The color drained from Voss's face. You can't prove it. There's nothing to tie me. Poirot's smile was small, unhurried. On the contrary, mon cher. There is the empty vial, the handwriting, and... He paused, pointing toward the corner of the desk. A trace of lavender oil. You mixed it into the poison, yes? To mask its bitterness? And now, that scent has betrayed you. The same perfume that clung to the letter you burned, to the paper in your drawer, to your fingers even now. Halliday, who had stood silently in the doorway, stepped forward. That's enough. Voss, you'd best come quietly. But Voss laughed a brittle, hollow sound. You fools. You think you've won. Geoffrey was a monster. He destroyed every life he touched. And now you call me murderer. You should thank me for ending it. Poirot did not move. Perhaps, but monsters, doctor, reveal what is worst in others. You see, your crime began long before the poison touched his glass. It began the day you allowed bitterness to become reason." Voss's face twisted with fury. In a flash, his hand darted toward the desk, seizing a scalpel gleaming under the lamplight. Halliday lunged, but Poirot's voice cut through the air, calm and commanding. "Non." The single word froze Voss mid-motion. Poirot's gaze held him with terrible precision. "Do not add cowardice to cruelty. You have already played God once. Do not try to escape his judgment now." For a heartbeat, the tension hung sharp and unbroken. Then the doctor's shoulders sagged. The scalpel clattered to the floor, its edge glinting briefly before rolling beneath the desk. Halliday stepped forward and placed a firm hand on his arm. "It's over." Poirot exhaled softly, straightening his tie. "Oui, mon ami. Over but never finished. Crimes of the mind never end with arrest. They linger, like scent on the air." As Voss was led away, the clock struck 11. Poirot remained in the study, his eyes fixed upon the empty vial on the desk. "So orderly," he murmured, "so precise. Yet the human heart, it rebels against order. It creates chaos, even in the neatest mind." When he turned to leave, the wind rattled the window panes. Outside, the fog was thinning at last, and dawn began to touch the moors with pale light. Poirot paused beneath the portrait of Rowena Marchmont. Her eyes, dark and eternal, seemed to watch him with sorrow rather than malice. He bowed his head slightly. "Madame, your curse is ended. But not by witchcraft, by weakness. The evil of men is always more terrible than the magic of ghosts." And as he walked away, the fire in the library guttered once and went out, leaving the house silent, cleansed at last of its shadows but not its memories. The wind had quieted to a murmur by dawn, and Brackenby Manor lay still beneath a pale grey sky. The moors beyond shimmered faintly with mist, and the world seemed caught in that strange, weightless pause between night and morning, a time when even the house appeared to hold its breath. Poirot stood in the drawing-room, his small frame motionless before the fire, the dying embers painting his face with shifting shades of gold and shadow. The events of the night lingered in the air like smoke. The confession, the arrest, the silence that followed when the truth had at last stepped into the light. Yet, Poirot's eyes were not those of a man content. They were alive still, restless, probing. His mind, sharp as ever, refused the comfort of resolution. Something in the air of Brackenby remained unsettled, like a melody unfinished. "Non," he murmured softly. "It is not yet done. There is one piece, one small piece that does not fit." Inspector Halliday entered, his coat slung over his arm and fatigue written plainly across his face. "He's locked up tight," he said gruffly. Voss admitted to the poisoning. Said the letter was his doing too. Seems clear enough, doesn't it? Poirot smiled faintly, though his gaze did not leave the fire. "Ah, mon ami, clarity is a dangerous illusion. It gives comfort, yes, but not always truth." Halliday frowned. "What are you getting at? You've got your confession, the poison, the motive. What more could you want?" Poirot turned then, his eyes gleaming with quiet amusement. "Only perfection, my dear Inspector, and perfection demands that every shadow be accounted for. Tell me, why did he keep the second letter?" Halliday blinked. "What?" "The second letter," Poirot repeated softly. "The one sent to Lady Isabel. Why did he keep a draft of it in his drawer when every other trace he tried so carefully to destroy? Why risk discovery when he is so precise, so orderly, so clever?" The inspector hesitated. "Maybe he wanted proof of his own genius. Criminals can be vain." "True," Poirot said thoughtfully. But Voss was not vain in that way. He took pride in control, not applause. No, he kept it because he needed it for someone else. Halliday sighed, rubbing his temple. "You think he wasn't acting alone?" "I think," said Poirot quietly, "that the witch of Brackenby has yet to cast her final spell." At that moment, footsteps sounded in the hallway, quick, unsteady. Evelyn appeared at the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide. "Monsieur Poirot," she gasped. "It's Lady Isabel, she's gone." Poirot's head lifted sharply. "Gone?" "She left before dawn. The maid says she packed a small bag and went toward the village." Halliday muttered a curse. "You don't think she—" Poirot raised a hand. "We shall not think, mon ami. We shall see." They set off at once, the chill air biting at their faces as they followed the muddy lane that wound toward the village. The mist clung low to the ground, veiling the hedgerows and the moor beyond. Poirot walked quickly, his cane tapping in a steady rhythm, his eyes scanning the road with the precision of a man counting the very heartbeat of the earth. And then, at the turn where the lane forked toward the ruins of the chapel, he stopped. There, pressed into the soft mud, were footprints small, deliberate, leading not to the village, but to the moor. Poirot crouched, his gloved hand hovering above the print. "You see, Inspector, the lady does not flee to safety. She flees to solitude." Halliday's expression hardened. What's she running from? Her husband's death? Or her own guilt? Poirot straightened, his gaze fixed upon the distant silhouette of the chapel through the mist. "Let us discover which." The path grew rougher as they neared the ruin. The air smelled of wet stone and old earth, and the faint cry of a crow echoed above them. Poirot's heart beat faster, not with fear, but with certainty. There was a pattern here, a design elegant in its cruelty. He felt it as keenly as he felt the weight of his own pulse. Inside the chapel, the shadows seemed to breathe. Lady Isabel stood before the crumbling altar, her figure framed by the pale light filtering through the broken roof. Her hair was loose, her hands clasped tightly before her. When she turned, her face bore that strange calm that comes only when truth is no longer avoidable. "Madame," Poirot said softly, stepping forward, "you have taken a long walk for one who claims innocence." Her lips trembled, but her voice was steady. "I am not running from you, Monsieur Poirot. I am running from what I did." Halliday stiffened. "Then you admit it, you helped Voss?" "No," she whispered. "He thought I would. But I didn't need to." Her eyes lifted to Poirot's. "I knew long before you came that Geoffrey's heart would fail. He had been growing weaker every day. Her voice faltered, then steadied. "I only gave him reason to fear. I wanted him to feel what I felt for years, helpless, small, trapped beneath his cruelty." Poirot's gaze never wavered. "You sent the second letter, not the doctor?" "Yes," she said quietly. "After I found the first one, the one from Evelyn, Geoffrey told me about it. He laughed. He said he'd made her mother's life miserable and would do the same to the daughter if she didn't stop prying. I wanted him to suffer for it. So I copied her handwriting, added my words, and left it where he'd see. I never dreamed it would drive him to death." Halliday took a step forward, but Poirot lifted a hand, and when you realized what Voss had done, her eyes filled with tears. "He came to me after, said it was better this way, that Geoffrey's heart would have failed soon anyway. He begged me to keep quiet. I told him I would, but I wrote him a letter that night too. I told him I would tell you everything if he harmed anyone else. I left it in my desk." Poirot nodded slowly, the final pieces falling into place. "So it was not vengeance alone that moved you, madame. It was despair." She turned away, staring at the ruined altar. "I thought when he died, I would feel free. But there is no freedom in fear. It only changes hands." The wind sighed through the broken windows, scattering a few leaves across the floor. Poirot's eyes softened. "You see, Lady Isabel, there was never a witch upon this lane. The curse of Brackenby was not born of superstition but of silence, each of you guarding your pain as though it were a treasure." Halliday exhaled, lowering his voice. "What do we do now?" Poirot looked toward the moor, where dawn was breaking pale and slow. "Justice, my friend, must sometimes be tempered with mercy. The law will have Voss, but Lady Isabel, she must live with her truth, and that is punishment enough. Lady Isabel sank to her knees before the altar, her sobs quiet, almost reverent. Poirot turned away, his steps echoing softly on the stone. Outside, the mist was thinning, and the path back to the manor stretched clear and empty before them. As they walked, Halliday spoke at last. "You knew she'd come here, didn't you?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Of course. Guilt, it returns always to the place where fear was born. It is an instinct, most human." Back at the manor, the first light of morning flooded the windows, casting long bars of gold across the floors. The house, for the first time in days, seemed still tired, but at peace. Evelyn waited in the hall, her face wan with uncertainty. "It's over?" she asked quietly. Poirot nodded. "Oui, mademoiselle. The ghosts have spoken. Your mother may rest now, and so, perhaps, will you?" Her eyes filled, and she whispered, "I never wanted anyone to die." He inclined his head kindly. "Few ever do. But death, it is like truth, it arrives whether we invite it or not." She hesitated. "And the witch's curse?" Poirot's smile returned, faint and knowing. "Ah, that there was never any witch, only people. And people, they create curses far stronger than magic, curses of greed, of pride, of guilt. But take heart, mademoiselle. They can also create forgiveness." As she turned away, the sound of the clock struck noon, echoing softly through the halls. Poirot stood a moment longer, gazing into the fading fire. His reflection shimmered in the glass above the mantel, small, precise, and utterly still. "Order restored," he murmured. "But at what cost?" His eyes lifted toward the portrait of Rowena Marchmont one final time. The painted face seemed softer now, the eyes less accusing. Poirot gave a small bow. "Adieu, madame. Your vengeance is complete, though you never sought it." Then he reached for his hat and cane, and as he stepped into the sunlight, the wind stirred through the autumn leaves, carrying with it the last faint whisper of Brackenby's legend. Somewhere on the moor, a crow called once sharp, lonely, final. Poirot paused, adjusted the brim of his hat, and smiled to himself. "The witch of Brackenby Lane," he said softly, "was never a woman at all. It was fear and Hercule Poirot. He has exorcised it." With that, he walked down the lane, his figure receding into the golden morning as the manor behind him sank into peace. Secrets at last laid to rest beneath the gentle veil of dawn.